Crucifixion. The word crucifixion comes from the Latin crucifixio, meaning fixed to a cross. It was a method of execution used mainly by the Romans. Victims were nailed or tied to a wooden cross and left to hang for hours, sometimes days, until death finally came through exhaustion, suffocation, or shock. Crucifixion wasn't just about killing, it was about humiliation and public warning. The most famous crucifixion in history is that of Jesus Christ, flaying. The term flaying comes from the Old English fleam, meaning to strip the skin off. This gruesome punishment involved literally peeling the skin off a living person. Used by civilizations like the Assyrians, it was a slow and excruciating death meant to terrify enemies. Sometimes, the skins of the victims were nailed to city walls as a gruesome warning. Scaphism. Scaphism comes from the Greek word scaphe, meaning something scooped out, like a hollow vessel or boat. This was one of the most horrifying Persian punishments. The victim was trapped between two boats or hollowed-out logs, force-fed milk and honey, and left floating in stagnant water. Insects would swarm, burrow into their flesh, and slowly eat them alive over days. Death was slow, agonizing, and putrid. Brazen bull. The brazen bull, or bull of Phalaris, comes from ancient Greece. Brazen means made of brass or bronze. It was a hollow metal bowl where the condemned person was locked inside. A fire was lit underneath, heating the metal until the person roasted to death. Ingeniously cruel, pipes were installed so the screams would sound like a raging bull. It was meant to entertain the rulers while horrifying the public. Breaking wheel. The breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel, was named after Saint Catherine, a martyr who according to legend survived the torture. Used mainly in medieval Europe, the victim was tied to a large wheel, and their limbs were smashed with iron bars. Sometimes they were left alive, their broken bodies woven between the spokes, to die slowly in public view. Impaling. The word impale comes from the Latin impellere, meaning to drive in with a stake. A sharp pole was driven through the victim's body, often starting from the lower body and exiting through the mouth, shoulders, or neck. This brutal method was used by figures like Vlad the Impaler, the real-life inspiration for Dracula. Victims could remain alive for hours or even days, slowly dying in agony. Ling Chi, death by 1,000 cuts. Ling Chi is a Chinese term meaning slow slicing or lingering death, used as a form of extreme punishment in imperial China. The condemned was tied up while small slices were systematically cut from their body. It wasn't just a death sentence, it was a message of shame and dishonor. Ling Chi was abolished only in the early 1900s. Boiling. Boiling as a form of execution was as straightforward and horrifying as it sounds. Victims were either submerged in boiling water, oil, or even molten lead. Boiling alive was used in several cultures, including medieval Europe and parts of Asia, often for crimes like poisoning or treason. It was a slow and agonizing death, meant to make an example of the criminal. Sawing. In sawing executions, the victim was often hung upside down to keep the brain oxygenated and alive longer. Then they were literally sawed in half, usually starting from between the legs. It was used in parts of the Middle East, Europe, and Asia as a gruesome public spectacle. The Iron Maiden, though its existence is debated. The Iron Maiden is said to have been a medieval torture device shaped like a standing coffin, lined inside with iron spikes. When the door closed, the spikes would pierce vital organs, but not enough to kill immediately. It was designed to cause extreme pain before death. The rack. Rack comes from Old English rake, meaning punishment. This was a brutal torture device where the victim's wrists and ankles were tied to rollers on either end of a wooden frame. By turning the rollers, executioners would stretch the victim's body, dislocating joints and tearing muscles, sometimes until the body literally tore apart. Execution by elephant, used mainly in South and Southeast Asia, particularly in India. Elephants were trained to crush, dismember, or torture prisoners slowly. These enormous animals could be ordered to prolong the death or end it swiftly based on the ruler's command. The sheer psychological terror made it a feared punishment. Keelhauling. Keelhauling comes from Dutch keelhalen, meaning to haul under the keel of a ship. It was a form of punishment used by sailors, particularly by the Dutch Navy. The condemned man was tied to a rope, thrown overboard, and dragged under the ship's keel, often leading to drowning, massive injuries from barnacles, or death from shock and blood loss, pena colii, punishment of the sack, or Roman execution method. Pena means punishment, and colii means of the sack. The condemned was sewn into a leather sack with live animals like snakes, dogs, monkeys, or roosters, then thrown into a river to drown. The writhing animals added to the horror and agony before death.